Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming to this final know-how session. My name is Jim Morty. I'm the Chief Executive of Generator, the organisation that has brought these events together for you. I just wanted to say a few words of thanks really to Tony Wadsworth. Tony Wadsworth has had an extremely distinguished career in the music industry. He was Chair and Chief Executive of EMI and is still at the forefront of the industry, being both on the board of UK Music and also Chair of the BPI, the British Phonographic Industry. And also recently wrote a fantastic report called Remake Remodel into the Future of the Record Label. I just wanted to say Tony Wadsworth is on our board at Generator and as such has been a great value and great help to us at Generator and helped shape the things that we do for all of you now. And this is the third in the series where he's invited some esteemed worldwide industry figures, independent industry figures in particular. We've had Jeff Travis and we've had Richard Russell from Excel. And today he's invited and brought with him Martin Mills. So without any further ado, Tony Wadsworth, Martin Mills.
Thank you very much. So as Jim says, this is the third in our series of conversations. A couple of years ago I spoke with Jeff Travis of the Rough Trade label, and last year we spoke with Richard Russell, who's the head of the Excel label. And so today we're privileged to be talking to the nearest thing that Jeff Travis and Richard Russell have got to a boss. Because both Rough Trade and Excel are part of the Beggars group of labels, arguably the most successful independent record label in the world, or label group in the world. It's home to Rough Trade, it's home to Excel, but also to Matador and 4AD and other labels. Artists from the White Stripes to the XX to Adele, and the history of the label, which we'll get into, spans a huge range of different types of artists. It's been a pioneer both in the type of music that they release as well as the way that they do business. And it's a great example as an independent in the competitive world of recorded music. It started out in the 70s, founded by this same man who heads up the label group today. So if you just please give a warm welcome to Martin Mills.
Thank you.
So Martin, a lot of people in this room are either starting out on careers in the music industry or connected with the music industry, and I think they're curious. Here you are with Adele at 9 weeks at #1 in America, but it wasn't always like that. So how do you start? How do you start out? And more specifically, how did you start out? And if you can take us back to the early 70s, because Beggars wasn't always a record label and started out, I believe, as a record store. So if you could just really take us back to that.
Okay, yeah, it started because I was working in a record store. I'd been a civil servant and I decided to do something different and got a job in a second-hand record store in Notting Hill called the Record and Tape Exchange. And a friend and I had the idea, a friend who I was running a mobile disco with at the time called Beggars Banquet, and I had the idea of starting a record shop which sold new and second-hand records side by side, not in the same place. So you could buy David Bowie's Space Oddity at £2.50 new, or £1.80 in good condition second-hand, or 90 pence pretty scratched. And that went really well. So that one shop became 6 shops eventually. The second shop had a space underneath it which we turned into a rehearsal room. This was around punk time, so this was all kind of blowing up around punk. And we had various other punk bands at the time rehearsing down there. One of them was a band called the Lurkers, who were 3 chord geniuses from West London. And the manager of the shop started managing them. He needed help, so he brought myself and my partner in. We tried to get him a record deal. We couldn't, because every record label would already have one punk band, and that was their insurance policy. They weren't doing anything else. And so we put the record out ourselves. Right. And these days, it's very easy to do that. Those days, there was no guidebook, there was no map, and no one really done it before.
So you had the record stores for what, 3 years before you
3 years
started the label? And when you put the first record out, did you think this is the beginning of a label, or did you think let's just put a record out for the Lurkers?
No, we thought let's put a record out, and then it did quite well, so we thought, well, let's put another record out, and then we thought, here's a really good idea, let's do another band.
Ah, right, yeah. So when did you get your second band?
after a few months.
Yeah.
And the fourth one was Gary Newman, T-Boy Army, and that blew up.
And that was the big moment when you went from being a small punk label to enjoying success, which was on a whole different level.
That was the moment we went from bouncy salary checks to not. Yeah.
And I mean that and Gary Newman and Tubeway Army, because the big #1 single, Our Friends Electric, to remind everybody, subsequently sampled by Sugar Babes, wasn't it?
Yep.
Was unusual really, because you talk about being a punk label, but this wasn't anything to do with, well, it was only vaguely related to punk, wasn't it?
Well, we weren't really a punk label, actually. I mean, we started with a punk band, but my partner at the time had kind of quite diverse tastes, and frankly, we had a pretty mixed bag of early releases. And Gary, you wouldn't really call punk, but Gary, even in the early days, punk. I mean, he was more tuneful punk. He didn't like punk at all. He was just kind of riding on it to get to where he wanted to go to.
Yeah.
And by the time he got to his second album, which was much less guitar-y than the first album, because he'd managed to persuade us to borrow some money to buy him some mini Moogs and poly Moogs and things, it was much more synthesizers than it was guitars. And
so, after really starting a label 2 years later, you have this incredible success, where not only do you have a #1 single, but at one point I think you had 3 albums in the top 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
So did you think, well, it's always going to be like this?
No.
And then gear up accordingly?
No, we're not doing that with Adele today either.
No.
No, we didn't. And for a long time, the struggle was to be something other than Gary Newman's record label, because Gary was enormous. He was really huge. I mean, had 3 of his own albums in the top 20 at the same time. I don't know if anyone's ever done that since.
No.
So he was
Probably
absolutely
Adele
huge.
when you release the next album.
Well, probably, yes. So no, the struggle for us, was to become something other than Gary Newman's record label.
And that's because that, I mean, I think that's a perennial struggle for record labels. And I know that quite a few record labels, I mean, on the one hand, success is great, but it's a double-edged sword, because they're weighed down with one huge success. Yeah. And Virgin Records, for instance, was this amazing independent label with left field music, and then the Spice Girls seemed to completely send them in the wrong direction. Yeah. So how do you handle that sort of huge success in a relatively small operation?
It's difficult. You have to really create balance, and again, we're doing that today with Adele. I think it's important to know what you are, and to keep developing what you are, and to keep on track. And when something blows up like that, it has to be the exception rather than the rule. You can obviously use it as an opportunity to grow, but you shouldn't be deceived in thinking that you're suddenly some kind of genius and you can do it again and again and again.
So, after having had the success with Tubeway Army, I suppose one of the next key milestones for the Beggars Group was the founding of the 4AD label, which was a whole different type of music again, really. You want to just talk about how that came about?
Well, that was directly related to Beggars Banquet being over-occupied and over-identified with Gary Newman. Ivo and Peter, who were 2 people who work in the shops, came to us and said, we'd like to start a record label, and we gave them £2,000 to do it with, which is same amount of money as we started the shops with, actually. And the idea was it would be a feeder label for Beggars Banquet, but the only band that did that was Bauhaus, because after that, it started developing such a strong aesthetic and identity of its own that it just made sense for it to run in parallel to Beggars Banquet.
Right. And so the flavour of the music on 4AD was I don't know how you would describe it, actually. Did it eventually go slightly goth?
Both Beggars and 4AD were goth, to be honest. I mean, I think the kind of accidental difference between the labels is Beggars was always about guitars and 4AD was always about the female voice.
Yeah.
Apart from Frank Black.
Right. So you had artists like Throwing Muses,
Cocktail Twins, Deck and Dance.
Yeah. And then, obviously, the secret of this continued success is experimenting with different musical directions, because then in the late 80s you had this huge #1 hit with Pump Up the Volume by Mars. Did that come from a different direction? Was this on a different label?
That was on 4AD.
That was on 4AD.
Almost unbelievably, and that was like almost everything in those days. It was a complete accident, really, because Mars was was a project of Colourbox, who were a band that were already signed to us, who actually were quite electronic in their own right, and a band on One Little Indian called A.R. Kane. So it was the two of them coming together and just having an idea for a track. And it became, the first independent #1 single.
Wow. And that was an absolutely huge record. Was that in the States as well? Did you have that?
That was huge everywhere and in the States. And it was a seminal record in lots of ways. I mean, it was a seminal record musically, and it also fundamentally changed 4AD, because 4AD really, there was an awful lot of infighting after that record, people fighting about money and so on, and there was a big sample suit with Pete Waterman, and it was kind of quite ugly actually in a way.
Yeah.
For a while.
Well, as we were having chat earlier, and I think there's a phrase in the music industry which says, wherever there's a hit, there's a writ. And that's always very, very true. People just come diving in for the money whenever there's any money being generated. Yeah. So after this huge dance hit, then relatively soon after that, you founded what was a dance label, which is called XL. Mm. And was that in any way connected with Mars, or did this come from a different direction?
No, it was completely disconnected. XL was originally a label called City Beat, in fact. City Beat came before XL, and City Beat was simply a guy that we knew who worked in, whose mother ran a dance record shop in the West End called Groove, who wanted to start a house music label. This was the beginning of house in the mid-80s. And so we just brought him into the family in the same way as 4AD had come in the Beggars Banquet family. City Beat came in as well, and did pretty well with House of Pain was ours, and DJ Easy Rock and so on. Yeah. And then we founded City Beat out of that to be XL out of that to be an underground 12-inch single label. Would you believe?
Right. And so and it was an underground label for quite a few years, really. It only really started to branch out at what particular point? What was the point at which XL looked like it was becoming something different from being an underground dance label?
Well, it became an overground dance label when rave broke out in the late 80s, and with Prodigy, obviously the early Prodigy singles like SL2 and Liquid. We had like every single we released was the top 20 for a while, because the rave of the time was just XL were just amazing act and got everything.
Yeah. So as you say, the big act that really came out of that, you happened to be on it again. There's a bit of a theme running through here, which is the Prodigy, and the Prodigy. Their first album did okay, I think, but then was it their second album with you that? Fat of the Land, which became a phenomenon?
Fat of the Land was the third one.
Third album.
The first album did okay. The second album, Jilted Generation, was, I think, maybe #1, maybe #2. But it was a big record around the world. And set them up for Fat of the Land, which sold 8 million and was #1 in 27 countries. And
that was, musically, I think, again, not only a departure, but it was also, I think quite revolutionary in the marketplace, because there was this merging of rock and dance music, which hadn't really been done, certainly not in the UK, quite as successfully as that before.
No, it really hadn't. I mean, Prodigy were a dance band that operated like a rock band. Like, they played gigs, not clubs. They didn't appear on TV. They never appeared on TV. They wouldn't do it. They were a dance outfit with a rock band's ethos. And that was, I think they were very largely responsible for the kind of merging of dance music and rock music in a way. Like today, I'm sure everyone here likes both. There's bits of both that you like. You're not kind of tribal about beats and guitars, but then you really were. I mean, it was almost unheard of to like both. I mean, when an artist like Blondie recorded Heart of Glass, that was really revolutionary. You will remember it.
Absolutely, yeah. It was like a first disco #1.
Yeah, from a rock band.
From a rock band, yeah. And I suppose similar sort of mixtures of the genre, Red Hot Chili Peppers, who were pretty early movers, and EMF to an extent as well, who were using beats as well as being in a band. So
and those boundaries completely don't exist here. They still exist in other countries more, and I think they exist in America more.
Yeah.
But much less, but almost entirely not here. And that's fantastic. I love that.